Good evening and welcome to Decision 2020. It's TVJ's daily look at the activities leading up to the September 3 general election. I'm Herman Green. Welcome. And a special welcome if you're joining us on our YouTube channel or on onespotmedia.com. Now, the election debates are out of the way and both parties have put forward their manifestos for this election cycle. Now, this evening we'll be tearing those manifestos apart. But before we go there, let's recap last Saturday's leadership debate.
All eyes were directed to the screen on Saturday to see the two men who are vying to be the country's next prime minister. It was the last lap in a series of 3 election debates. The PNP's Dr. Peter Phillips kicked things off.
On September 3rd, the Jamaican people have an important choice to make. We can either continue with economic stagnation or we can approach with major crime and murder statistics, with a deepening digital divide, or we can choose a different future.
I will never forget Mas Tom, an elderly gentleman leaving the polling station on election day and waving his ink-stained hands at me, saying, "Andrew, do the right thing." Today, I am very proud to report to this country that we have been doing the right thing by Jamaica.
Now delving into the issues which have arisen on the campaign trail, blow by blow, the questioner challenged the debaters with statistics on education, states of emergency, undelivered promises, and the manifestos. First up, COVID-19.
Jamaica is not the only country to have decided to go ahead with an election. And there's very good reason why governments do this. The truth is that what we have learned for the last 4 or 5 months in managing the pandemic is that we must go on with our society.
In the period of the Emancipendence celebrations, the recommendation was made that there should be a tightening of the arrangements, the curfew arrangements and the other arrangements. That was ignored. The consequence has been devastating on the people of Jamaica. Yes, there will be a pandemic, but there's no need to ignore proper advice. There's no need to ignore common sense.
But it was Dr. Phillips's response to the question of nominating more women to the Senate which got social media irate.
The support for child care, for example, in the House and Senate, and generally is one such factor. The fact that women carry a greater share of household work is also another factor. So actually getting the right level of representation is going to take more than just a commitment. We're going to have to deal with all of these other factors.
Next, crime.
Just need to ask the people of Mount Salem, the people of Greenwich Farm, the people in Augustown, how that expenditure of security and increased presence, which the opposition every time in Parliament calls for, we have done it and we have delivered.
The murder rate is higher over the 4.5 years of the current JLP administration than it has been in the previous 4.5 years of the People's National Party administration.
In the end, it was a case of highlighting achievements and plans for the future. They also asked Jamaicans to make the right choice on September 3rd.
So that was the last of the 3 debates, and that was on Saturday. Now, this evening we're going to be looking at the manifestos. Joining us to give us their assessment of the manifestos are Jamie Shevans, the Youth Outreach Officer at the National Integrity Action, that's NIA. We have social commentator Javian Nelson, Tijani Christian, he's the chairperson for the Commonwealth Youth Council, and Sanjay Lewis, co-host of the Morning Agenda, that's on Power 106. You can also join the discussion by using the hashtag Decision2020JA. Ladies, gentlemen, thanks for joining us on Decision 2020.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Okay, good. First of all, I'm going to start with you, Jamian. You've seen the manifestos. What do what's your take on the manifesto of both the parties?
I think both parties, in their capacities, tried to fill gaps. I don't know how adequately it was done, but I think that's what we're going to discuss tonight and find out.
All right, Tijani?
Yeah.
For me, Herman, and thank you again for having me here. I will say that what we saw from either party was, again, this rhetoric of trying to appeal. For example, in the People's National Party's manifesto, you see more coming out of trying to appeal to their base. It was very group targeted. So you're seeing it from straight through teachers, doctors, nurses, students, very group targeted, and basically saying this is what we'll be giving each person. What we find from the Jamaica Labour Party manifesto is a bit more broad-based consultation that took place, and I see it coming out, they're highlighting the vision. So I think what happened with the PNP's manifesto is that they went straight into the what's versus the Jamaica Labour Party's manifesto started to show them some underlying values and theories and why they're doing this, and then went into what we will be doing. What both fell short of was more of the how, not so much the what.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Javian, give me your take on both of them.
Yeah, I think both the PNP and JLP presented really good manifesto ideas. I think it's clear that both parties have a clear sense of what they want to do for the people and who they're targeting. I think for the manifestos, though, there are some key areas that are there: health and education, for example, arts and culture, technology and energy, and you see where the difference between the both parties in some areas is very, very clear. For energy, for example, you see a huge difference in what the JLP has proposed in comparison to what the People's National Party has proposed. I think, as is customary, you see quite a lot of plans and ideas about education and training, scholarships, provisions for teachers, etc., which is very intriguing, and it would be very good to see what will actually happen come September 4 after the elections are over.
All right, Sanjay, your comment on what you take on both the manifestos, but also tell me what stood out for you in each of them.
Well, I think for the JLP is more broad-based, and you recognize the PNP, one of the things that they would have done is try to make it specific to target individuals, because a lot of times when we hear about manifestos, it's a big policy document that many Jamaicans may not necessarily be interested in, unless you're a nerd like myself who would want to sit down and read the entire thing. So I think the PNP was more specific and more targeted in how they do it. The JLP was more on a broader level, policy level. In terms of what stood out for me, when I look at the matter of health, I recognize, for example, that the Jamaica Labour Party is putting forward a health information system that will connect all the hospitals on one central system. And I think that's a good proposal that they're putting forward. But some persons may say that that's something that they had promised in the 2016 manifesto. But again, I'm seeing where it's more comprehensive in this one, and I'm happy about that. As it relates to the People's National Party, I recognize, for example, as it relates to culture, they're focusing specifically on the Rastafarian. And that is interesting, and they were very definitive in what they have said. They have indicated that in the first 100 days, what they will do, and they will recognize Rastafarianism. And that was pretty interesting for me.
All right, you pointed out you brought up health, and I want to look on that specifically. Jamie, let me come back to you. In terms of health and any of the other three areas that we'll be looking at, do you think they are feasible? Which one do you think is feasible? Which one do you think is not feasible in terms of health?
In terms of health, I think the proposition by both are feasible if they can find the budget to do all the things that they're saying that they will do in terms of upgrading facilities in communities' health centers, as well as the building of the Western Children's Hospital and Cornwall Regional Hospital. But my question is that all of that sounds well and good, but with the impact of COVID on our economy, where are you going to find the funds?
That's exactly what I was thinking in terms of feasibility. where is the money going to come
Right.
from in this time?
Where is the money going to come from? And there is no indication of where the money is coming from. At this point in time, when you have persons who have lost their jobs, persons taking reduction in salaries, that also impacts government revenue because you're not collecting as much taxes anymore. So everything has a rolling effect. Where are you going to find the funds? In terms of the centralization, in terms of people's records and stuff, data, all of that is well and good as well. But as Sanjay said, this was promised prior to. Why wasn't it done? And if the reasons why it wasn't done are technical, what is the difference now going into this period? So those are things that would need to be addressed.
Javian, in terms of the feasibility, we had the finance minister and the opposition spokesperson on finance, their debate, and also the leaders had their debate. Do you think either of them addressed that issue of how are we going to finance this proposal in terms of health that you have put forward? Do you think they addressed it in any way?
Well, I think Dr. Nigel Clark made an attempt. I think he did so by highlighting to us what he says are new expenses that's not currently in the budget, and he differentiated between CapEx and the current expenditures. I noticed though that Mark Golden did not give an actual figure of how much it would cost, but said that they've identified different areas in which it would come from. So I think this is something that we have to begin to press on in terms of our leaders providing more information about their budgets and what the costs would be. But unfortunately, the election period is short and the manifestos did not all come out in a very timely manner. And so it's very difficult for us as citizens to really push them to give us some figures at this time because there's just so much happening. But I do believe they didn't answer sufficiently because I think what Jamaicans really want to hear is, what is this going to cost in total? How are we going to be able to finance it? And what kind of impact will it have on other areas of the budget?
Tijani, what's your take on it? Was the issue of making this a reality addressed by both parties?
Both. I think what I'll agree with Javian on the point of Dr. Clark explaining the capex and the recurring. At one point, the question was asked, not specific to health, but overall, in terms of what the plans, how will you cost the plan? I think Mark only did say something around $70 billion, 22 from public body surplus, 50 something coming from the 20 something coming from public body surplus, and then another 50 coming from somewhere else. I think it wasn't specific to health, but just broad based. The other implication, looking at overall for health, really is that if it is that I'm not seeing certain things coming up where it seems that private sector will have an interest to go into this market or to do something there, it means that the government will have to find it. The state will have to put those funds in. So the question comes back to how? Because if you're going to retrofit all of these hospitals, is it that you're going to retrofit and divest them to private sector and then they will take it over because they will be an interest to do that? But then what is the woes that will happen to the general public? Since health should be more and more considered maybe, in terms of a public good that all can access. So that is going to be a serious concern because healthcare is going to be even more than anything going in the present pandemic, a high point, a critical point, and everybody's asking how. I don't think Jamaicans are not willing to reprioritize budget to assist healthcare. But the thing is, if you reprioritize the budget to assist healthcare issues, what happens to the other areas?
All right. Sanjay, I want to bring you in here. Similarities in terms of what they are proposing. There are a few differences, but would you say they are quite similar? I mean, in terms of retrofitting 110 health facilities across the island, that's from the JLP, and the PNP saying they will increase patient capacity here, they'll upgrade. Quickly, what's your take on the similarity between the two?
I think with the exception of the housing situation that we recognize the PNP talking about the 130,000 houses and the JLP 70,000, I think generally they are saying the same thing. When you look on health, the JLP focus on primary health care, speak about that. The PNP is about primary health care also. Education is the same thing. So generally across the board, with a few differences, I think that they're relatively the same. I mentioned the Rastafarian thing that the PNP had spoken about that is not mentioned any at all in the JLP manifesto, but the broad policy ideas, I think they're pretty much the same.
All right, we have to take a break right now here on Decision 2020. But stay with us. We'll continue to look at the manifestos of both parties when we return. Welcome back to Decision 2020. This evening, we're delving into the manifestos of both the Jamaica Labour Party, JLP, and the People's National Party, PNP. Thanks for staying with us. Now, before we go to education, one more thing I wanted to touch on health. Tijani, let me go to you. Is there anything that was left out, that you think was left out of the manifestos that you think should have been addressed in health?
I mean, I would have preferred Javen to answer this. He's more the expert in that area. But nevertheless, I think one of the things that persons are always so looking at that relates to how you treat with certain things in terms of sexual and reproductive health. I don't think neither of them really brought up those kind of issues that has been recurring always, especially with a youthful population that we have in Jamaica. So that's a part of it that needs to be done. I think one of the things that I found coming out in the PNP's manifesto was that they were building particularly on what they call the JADEP program and all of those things by providing this universal healthcare coverage that they were proposing. And then I saw more from the JLP side, looking more on the infrastructure wise. But I think the sexual and reproductive health is something that they will have to reconsider a little bit more, because it's something that an area that is wide and persons have always been advocating on it because of its implication.
All right, Javian, since Tijani mentioned you, tell me what your take on that. Anything missing from the health?
I think both parties are fairly, there's a consensus rather about what we need to do to improve the health systems. And I think at the end of the day, it really boils down to the ideas. I don't think there's anything particularly missing. There were lots of things that both parties laid out. One of which was interesting to me was just the fixation around fixing the laboratory systems, which I think is really important and something that we've really spoken about. Tijani mentioned sex and reproductive health, which I think is another important issue, but I wouldn't have expected it to feature in this section, okay, though it has implications on health.
All right, I'll stick with you, Javian. We're moving on to education. What stood out to you now about the manifestos as it relates to addressing education issues?
I mean, for education, as I said, there were quite a lot of plans there. For me, what stood out, I found both parties proposing, as per usual, scholarships for disadvantaged young people. I think the PNP, though, has really been a huge talking point where the manifesto is concerned in this area, because they have one promise to do scholarships for one person per household up to 10,000 households, up to $350,000 per year. And then there are also issues that promises that they've made to teachers and nurses and policemen and women, which I think are important. And again, the whole idea of funding comes back. But I know, though, that the JLP included some issues around policy and legislation, which I think are particularly important going forward. So the amendments, completing the review and amendment of the Education Regulations Act and the Education Act. And they also looked at revisiting the Teachers Council Act, which was something that came up, I think, in the last administration. I've not heard much about it in recent times, which I think is really, really important. And then it was also interesting for me that both parties promised some increases to PATH recipients. The JLP has sent 10% to follow on from the massive increases that they've done over the last 4 years. And the PNP has said that they would increase by 50%, which for me is an enormous promise.
All right, Sanjay, I want to look back at also with the Education Manifesto. For the JLP, they have mentioned completing or continuing the Tablets in Schools program. expanding the education plan currently underway to train teachers in technological and online distance learning systems. Some of these were actually, the tablet in school definitely was in the last manifesto. What do you think about it being here now and it being addressed in this election cycle?
I mean, it's no surprise that the tablets in school would have been mentioned in the manifesto. I think that it's a hot button item coming from even the Jamaica Teachers Association asking about it. And one of the things that the parties have to do is that they have to appease different individuals. The teachers is a large in voting bloc. And to indicate and to stress the point about having tablets for them, you are appealing to those individuals that you want to vote. Because remember, you put forward a manifesto, you're going to put forward a manifesto to appeal to individuals to vote for you. So it's no surprise that they bring it back. I know that they're going to get some amount of flack, and you recognize the PNP already doing it, where they would have indicated that it's a promise that they are yet to deliver on, albeit the government is saying that, yes, we have started the process and we are going to complete it in this or the new term, should they be re-elected.
All right. Jamian, do you agree with that? Do you agree that it being in this manifesto now, what do you make of that?
I do agree with Sanjay that I expected to see it in the manifesto, especially during the type of period we're in, where distance learning is now going to become part of the norm, or blended learning. And so it is very important or critical that our children have the tools by which to continue their education. But however, separate and apart from the issue of the tablet, I don't think the tablet program in and of itself will address the issues that's going to be faced by our education system going forward, right? So a child can have a tablet and you can offer a certain amount of apps that are zero rated, or that you don't need data to do that. But then there are others by which you are definitely going to need data. And so the issue of equity or inequality in our school system is still going to be very pervasive, especially for those who are living in rural communities that do not have access to internet. And across, by both manifestos, we see where they are saying that they're going to lessen the digital divide or reduce the gap for those who are living in rural communities and those that generally don't have internet or steady internet access. But my question goes beyond that, because of a more personal experience with trying to get internet in a community where my family is from in St. Elizabeth. And I was told by both of the main internet providers that they just don't offer it in that community, specifically because of the terrain or the topography doesn't allow for it at this point in time. So I don't know if the promises made by both parties in terms of bridging that digital gap, especially when it comes down to rural communities, if they have had a discussion with our internet service providers as yet to see the possibilities of actually extending services to these communities and what would it take. Now, from a private sector point of view, as Tijani mentioned earlier, is it economical for me to go into these communities? And what if they say that it is not, right? You're still going to have an issue. And so I think they need to delve a little bit deeper in bridging that gap to ensure that going forward, we're going to be in a more blended system. Yes, you may have tablet, but if you don't have the internet to utilize the tablet, how far or practical is it really, right?
All right, I'm going to move on from that. Student Loan Bureau, tertiary education. Both parties also touched on that. Tijani, let me hear from you. What did you take? What did you make of that from both parties?
To be honest, SLB is always an item that comes in every manifesto, and it is always the promise of either it's going to be in different ways. You're going to either get lower interest rate, or you may not need a guarantor, or we are going to up the limit, or we are going to allow you some easement in how you pay back. It's always the same, and it's no different from this time around. There's no ingenious idea that came about with the SLB plan from both of the manifestos. It's either there's no guarantor or we're going to reduce it by 1%. So it's as expected, because I'm not sure if there's more or much more you can do with the SLB promises, but it's always expected in both manifestos. I think they reflected the idea equally.
All right, Javian, anything up?
Yeah. Well, I think on the SLB thing, I was intrigued to see that the JLP actually promised to include certificates. As was it the JLP? Sorry, I think the PNP actually. There's an expansion in what you can, because as far as I know right now, it's basically just for certain for degrees. And I think it's important that we provide more Jamaicans with opportunities to be able to actually go forward and improve their education, get certification, etc. And a number of people are unable to get that. And there are people who would like to matriculate to tertiary institutions, but there are some people who might need to start at the certificate level somewhere, maybe at a community college or some evening program somewhere,
so that's a
who
good
might
thing
need
for
some
you
assistance. I do think it is a good thing. I think the PNP also included something about nano degrees and stuff like that. So I think, there are lots of good things, and I think it's important that we constantly see how we can reform the Student Loan Bureau. As a former borrower, I'm very happy to see that year on year on year, we're having these changes. I remember when I borrowed, I paid a significant amount of money on a ridiculous interest rate. So I think it's important that we continue to see how we can support our country by ensuring that the Student Loan Bureau is
as I said to you the last time, this is like a sprint each evening. We're pretty much out of time. Sorry to cut you right there.
Oh dear.
We'll definitely pick up on it tomorrow in Decision 2020. That's where we have to leave it this evening, gentle folks. Join us tomorrow at 10 p.m. where we pick up on the discussion. But before we go, some news just in. Jamaica has recorded 102 new cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of cases to 2,459. And that's where we wrap up Decision 2020 for this evening. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for watching and join us again tomorrow. Pleasant viewing.